Listen, man, we are back on that. I was gonna wait a while to do this, but I realized if I don't do it now, it is definitely getting backburnered, so I wanted to hit it right here. Who is the biggest fraud in Tight Moon? And for more clarity, they mean in terms of power. Who would be a fraud in terms of power scaling? At first, I thought it said, who's the biggest fraud in FGO? And then I realized that it said Tight Moon. I was like, wow, Tight Moon. That is a lot of people. That's a lot of characters, brother. But we here for it. So I'm just gonna go through some of them and then I'll just pitch some ideas back and forth. And I have been through a few. These are hilarious. Here's the first one. Reminder that for all his big talk, Iskandar has only won one single fight in the franchise. And it was against 100 personas, who is not good, who were basically sent to their death to force him to use his MP. Okay, wow. This guy just came out swinging. This isn't true at all. Even in the context of Extella, sure, he lost against Nero, Tamamo, and Saber, but he also has beaten Ku and Li Xuan. But if we're being honest here, nobody's really looking to Iskandar for power. At least I would hope not. I hope people aren't looking at Iskandar like he's just off the chain strong. I gave him his credit where I felt like it was due, but as far as him actually putting it down in real deal fights, he more so just shows up and shows off his feats more so than him having any on his own. And you should see the next comment after this. You can tell this guy was hurt. He says, I mean, if we're just counting wins and losses regardless of context, add him turning Lancelot into a cripple from getting stampeded by the bulls. Clearly this is Iskandar's biggest fan. Even after the fact, you have somebody telling him, bro, you mean the same bulls that blindsided him while he was fighting somebody else? That's a crazy feat, man. Crazy feat. You mean the same Lancelot that got right back up after he got ran over by the bulls? Man, that's just unreal. Delusional. Here's another one. Archer Emiya gets hyped up by the fandom and he talks a lot of smack too. But remember, he only won against Cursed Arm Hassan. Laugh my fucking ass off. Medea was literally immortal in her domain, and Archer even stated that trying to fight her in her domain is just a waste of time and stupid. You know, I'm gonna be honest with you, man. The only person that's stupid here there's no way he's serious. Is he serious, guys? So you telling me that you're giving Medea credit for having territorial advantage while Emiya didn't? You're telling me that you're giving Medea credit when she had class advantage. The man was literally sniping under her at close range. This man was operating at a deficit. No way. Let's completely ignore the extra verse. I know you haven't read that, so you probably don't count it. Let's completely ignore him keeping up with Ku at close range, even though this man's an archer. Oh, Ku was holding back. I don't give a damn. He shouldn't be that good at close range. But guess what happened? He was about to force Ku to use his best move, and that went beyond Kirei's instructions, and he had to remind himself not to do so. And one of the worst offenders of all, and the person under this brought this up too, are we just forgetting the fact that he beat Herc 6 times in a row? I guess that don't count either. Are you drunk? Nah, you must have opened up these threads with that Henny, bro. He wrote that with the Henny in hand for sure. You gotta be drunk. Here's the next one. Gilgamesh, repeatedly mentioned as the strongest, can see into the future, can somewhat ignore being literally dead, and has the most hyped up and dick roll weapon in the entire franchise. Proceeds to lose virtually every fight he's in due to his ego. Okay, I agree with that to a certain extent. Now, all my people already know I'm a Gil fan. I want to preface this by saying I'm a Gil fan because a lot of you dudes are probably new or just passing by. When we talk about the biggest frauds here, we're more so speaking to who is more than likely incapable of doing these things that they are quote unquote said to be able to pull off, right? I'm not penalizing Gil for being held back by the story. I've seen too many contrived circumstances with him. And I've seen too many situations where when he's not held back and he can do what he actually wants to, he's really standing on business. So to say that he's a fraud, I would say yes and no. There's a lot more context to it. Anybody that doesn't like Gilgamesh isn't gonna give him any leeway. That's just true. Because whenever he is going off, whenever he is putting it down, then the conversation switches. And I love this part. They start to move the goalposts. One of their favorite tactics. Then it becomes, oh, well, he pulled it off, but barely. What the fuck? You just said that he couldn't do it. Now it's, oh, well, he barely did it. Oh, well, that's only because this person. Oh, stop being a hater. Spare us, please. Just spare us. Hold on. What about in the Fate route when Arturia got dog walked before she had Avalon? When everything was just fair and square, right? Oh, that's only because no. You see what's gonna happen? Oh, that's only because Shiro's her master. Stop it. Get some help. But when she gets Avalon in the second fight and she beats Gilgamesh, all of a sudden, Shiro being her master doesn't even matter. Nobody cared about it then because your point gets proven, right? Moving the goalposts. As if having a bad master is equivalent to all of a sudden gaining 60 conceptual defense. Yeah, okay. I mean, the obvious answer is Gilgamesh, who manages to lose fights he should have no problems winning because he has his head up his own ass. Again, strange fate. He's beating Herc after coming off the back of Richard spamming him with more than 20 Excaliburs back to back and still beating him. We're gonna completely ignore that. He's beating Herc and forcing him to use some of his best moves, and then he gets jumped by Humbaba and Ishtar. By the way, I got the key that you left at the beginning of the story. Am I really holding that against Gilgamesh because he dropped the key? Because we know how that would have ended if that wasn't the case. We know. It's funny that that worked against him because that's his loss, but isn't that convenient that every time his ego is his loss? And I bring up that same thing about Karna, and it begs the question sometimes, is it really always the ego? Look at what Gawain does to Karna. Look at what Sig does to Karna. Do you think Sig and Gawain is better than Karna? Oh, those are circumstances. Circumstances aside, if Karna is nerfed, they shouldn't beat him, especially the way that they did. Karna already got nerfed before he came into the story. And if you know his myth, you know he's supposed to be universal. So you took that from him to begin with. Then he gets into the story and he gets nerfed again, while Gawain is getting more and more buffs. And when Gawain finally beats him, you champion Gawain for being human after nerfing Karna all these different times. Karna was literally in the story fighting this man with no weapon because his mana consumption is quote unquote just that high. And Gawain was begging him to pull out his spear because he felt so offended. It's like, damn, how many times are you gonna nerf these characters? If you were gonna create them just to nerf them this hard, then why even let them exist? And I rock with Gawain too. But that fight was goofy. There's a lot of heinous acts going on in this series, and that goes beyond the writing. Same thing with Gilgamesh. They wanted somebody to win, and it's just fitting for it to not be the person that's stronger. It's not impressive, and let me tell you how bogus these guys are. Because when Emiya takes 6 lives from Herc, well, he didn't beat Herc, but he took 6 lives, so it's still impressive. The ultimate glaze. He's not a god, he's just a guy, it's just more impressive. Which is true, I've said that myself. But you do not keep the same energy. When Gilgamesh stands on business, when he's going toe to toe with Enkidu, who is literally one of the strongest people in the Nasuverse, without question, and he's bringing him to a tie, nobody has anything to say. Because again, Gilgamesh is at the top. Well, he's supposed to win. So Gilgamesh can't win regardless, because if he loses, you count it against him, no matter how contrived it is. If he does do well, he was at the top, he was supposed to win anyway. Or they just do the classic move the goalpost. Here's the same one. Also, kind of the entirety of the Saber class. They have some of the most broken MPs and are supposed to be the strongest class, yet they get beaten the shit out of in every Grail War, though they at least win in the end most of the time. The next one. Angry Mango, all the world's evils, king of demons, god of darkness, a living calamity incarnate, ironically really weak. And then the next response, he admits himself that he's weak, so no fraud here. Right. Right off the bat, I feel like people are misunderstanding the context of the question to begin with. They're trying to call characters fraudulent that are literally written to be that way on purpose. That's not really being a fraud. We have one from Inu, Emiya the faker himself. No, but really it's Void Shiki. Very true. And if many people have seen my profile on Shiki, I went into the fact how she is supposed to be a character that towers above all, even going way back. But one thing that often doesn't get brought up is her lack of feats. Her being the strongest is the statement directly from her. She doesn't really have anything to back that up beyond the mystic eyes. Now granted, she is still stronger than most people by default from just having the mystic eyes. I've talked about that also. There are a lot of people that she shouldn't be able to take out that she would be able to whack just from having those eyes. They can't stop her. It's just a matter of her getting to them, which in most cases should be highly unlikely. But her being one of the strongest is something that's on paper. It's I can remap the world if I want to. It's I can restructure the laws of the things that's around me. And another thing that a lot of people don't bring up is that this is constricted to Kara no Kyokai. So yeah, she may be the strongest, but we don't necessarily know that for sure outside of Kyokai because we haven't seen that. Even though she's been summoned as Void Shiki in FGO, you still have to remember that she's in a servant container. So unless Nasu writes it to be true, she wouldn't be able to go outside of the system anyway. She would be constricted to whatever the fate system lets her do, or whatever the counterforce lets her do. But this is something that's highly strong from her being connected to the root. Again, context matters. This is the same one also from Inu. No, she isn't. She stated herself on record that she would have zero chance against enemies of FGO unless it's specific conditions. Nasu himself has stated Boy would not be able to defeat a single servant, although this is probably definitely retcon. That's definitely retcon. And that's another thing. Y'all gotta realize how old these statements are. Like when they pull these statements out, I'm not gonna say all of them don't even matter because that's just not true, but they are extremely relative. We're talking about statements that are almost 20 years old. We're talking about when it was only Fate Stay Night or only when Fate was just starting. Of course the scale is going to be completely different. Case in point, the statement about her not being able to take on a single servant is complete bullshit because she's a servant herself now. So you're telling me that as a servant, she's not allowed to take on other servants? You see what I'm getting at here? That statement may have not have been an issue then, but it can be perceived as an issue now because it's different now. And I'm usually the type to never go against the creator, but even by his own logic that doesn't make sense. That's why you really got to be careful with these statements and also consider the time frames too. Some of them are just, but not all. She was barely able to win against a single Magus, Soren Arya. Okay, again, context. Soren had territorial advantage. This is her first time fighting against him when he's been strategically trying to figure out how to take her down the whole story. It's like the prep time conversation. If Shiki had nearly the same prep time as him, then it would be a fair fight. You giving all these handicaps against Shiki, didn't have her sword at first, couldn't read his body composition because that was literally her first time seeing him, had all the antagonists working against her and she beat all of them, and had the area to work against her to boot. All these handicaps against Shiki. The next thing you're gonna tell me is that it was unfair that Toko had to step in. So like Monica, who is also connected to the root, but definitely not one of the most OP characters. Okay, that's a lie. I think that's a lie. I gotta say it. She definitely has broken traits, but that would not matter with a lot of other characters who are more broken in different ways. When I'm thinking about a fraud, I'm thinking like Joan and Iskandar being top servants in Extella. Because we all know, based on what they've done, that's insane. That's insane by any standard. Has nothing to do with them being held back by the story like a lot of these characters that are being brought up. Nothing at all. If Iskandar wasn't held back by the story, he still wouldn't be one of the best servants. He still wouldn't be. If Joan wasn't held back by the story, she still wouldn't be a top servant. Yet if you go to Extella and you look at the statement that Nasu gave you, it's very clear that's what he quote unquote said. That's truly misleading. And for those who can't read between the lines, we all know that the reason that they have that statement behind them is because they're fan favorites and Nasu wanted to reincorporate them back into the story. So Extella would sell better. That's the whole reason, in case you need the author to hand feed you. As far as the Monica thing, I think it's because despite being connected to the root, they are constrained within their human bodies, so they have limitations on what can be done. That didn't stop Monica from bringing out the Beast of 666. Did that stop her from possessing Norma in Fate Labyrinth? In Fate Prototype, albeit not finished. And by Fate Prototype, I mean the one that comes after Fragments. In the one that comes after Fragments, Monica literally resummoned all the servants from the past war. So it's not a matter of she can't, it's a matter of what Nasu wants in that time. And again, strong characters do not have favor with his writing, unless maybe if you're a lead character. And it's the same with most people's writing. Nobody wants to see the strong character win. They want to see them lose. That's just what it is. But we be lying to sit here and say she's not busted. I can't imagine all the things she would have done if she wasn't held back by the story. Here's a hot take. I believe that pre-Draco Nero was very gassed. She can live up to the standard now because she's actually a beast, so she's really putting on for that role. But when she was just Saber class, her being able to do all that she's been able to do in the story just because Nasu wanted her to, it's foolery. When I made her don't sleep, you had several people coming in and saying, yeah, I like Nero, but this is crazy gas. Her being able to hang with Emiya, Tamamo, and Gilgamesh just because she's a part of the main cast. I guess Nero is hanging with those characters. I guess Nero is hanging with Tamamo, who is literally baby Amaterasu. What the fuck? And I'm gonna be honest, there's really not too much to get into here because everybody's just saying Gilgamesh, and I've already expressed what I think about that, so I'm not really gonna dwell on it too much more. But I think that's unfair. Context wise, I think that's unfair. If we're gonna talk being an actual fraud, let's talk about that. I'm not here to talk about who or who isn't being held back by the story. Cause if we're gonna go by that logic, Ku's a fraud. And I know damn well Ku's about that. But guess what? He's written to always die. But y'all like Ku, right? I do too, but I'm just making a point. Y'all like Ku, so nobody's gonna hold that against Ku. Man, this man Ku can literally be summoned into every class. Damn near. Literally every class in this series. You know what happens to him? Gashinda. Every time Gashinda. I guess he's a fraud. No, he's being held back. Call it what it is. I think Ilya is misleading for anybody who hasn't seen Prisma Ilya or the Don't Sleep. I really believe people fail to realize how capable she is with this mystic code. Not unbeatable, because I have shown that, but just way more powerful than it seems. And being a fraud can go both ways. It doesn't just have to be the person is weaker. It could be the case like Emiya, as I mentioned earlier, where they're stronger than they look. So it doesn't just have to be one way either. Same thing with Darius. Darius doesn't have the type of feats on paper as all these other characters. They're beasts, they're grands, they're connected to the root. But guess what Darius did? This man ended the world dolo. I'm still in shock to this day. Weaved it together, whatever you want to call it. Oh, he had help, whatever you want to call it. That's a crazy feat. Gilgamesh and Ilya literally had to bounce back through time to reverse what he did because they couldn't stop it. And one more group that I want to get into before we close out is the Eldritch servants. All of the Eldritch servants, by and large, should be stronger than everybody in the verse on paper, but we hardly ever get to see them do anything. And that's not to say that they haven't done anything at all. They just haven't scaled nearly as high as they could based on their background. People like Kali, if you know her background, I went into her. Again, not to say that she doesn't have feats, but for what she should be capable of, crazy fraudulent in verse, and I highly doubt they'll ever give it to her. It would have to be some type of a parody for these extremely strong servants to get the credit that they deserve. I think Orion is a fraud and shouldn't be Grand Archer, and I have glossed over that a little bit on the channel. I want to preface that by saying I do like Orion. I liked Orion before everybody else hopped on the bandwagon, before he was a Grand, before it Atlantis was a thing back when it was just him and Artemis. I got the lore up on the channel from years ago. The thing with Orion is that while he is strong, there's a lot of caveats for him to get to that place. Way too many caveats for him to be a Grand. Yeah, he has his feats against Artemis. I'm not taking from that. It's just that you got him getting cleaned up by servants like Canis, literally had to nerf her and jump her to stand his ground. Why are you jumping people when you're supposed to be of this status? You shouldn't have to do all that as a Grand. And if you read Atlantis, you know. You got servants out here sacrificing themselves, you getting buffs from the nanomachines, buffs from Hephaestus, things that you wouldn't even normally have. All of that just to be barely good enough. That's a lot of assistance for you being quote unquote grand servant. Well, on the flip side, I think back to the introduction of Hassan and he's getting nerfed and he's still better than everybody else. It's like a complete U-turn, a downgrade even to what a grand is supposed to be. Overall, if I had to just give it to one person, I'd say Void Shiki. I'm sure there's plenty of others that I could give it to, but she definitely needs something to back up those statements. And it's not even the fact that I don't believe it, it's just that if I had to prove it, I couldn't, because what am I gonna prove it with? Her saying it in the story? Let's be real.